The ordinary human among extraordinary beings. Hera had always been told that she was destined for something great. Back on Earth, she had been a soldier, a leader in the human resistance during the wars that had raged across her homeworld. She had been trained to be tough, resourceful, and relentless. But now, standing at the entrance of the Galactic Academy of Knowledge, she felt incredibly small. The Academy was a breathtaking structure, unlike anything she had ever seen before. Its crystal walls gleamed in the sunlight, refracting the purple light of Centurion Prime's twin suns into thousands of iridescent shards. The Academy spires seemed to stretch out of sight, reaching up to where the stars began, making the building feel like it was part of the very fabric of the galaxy. It was here that the brightest minds from across the universe came to learn, grow, and share knowledge. But Hera wasn't here to become a scientist or an engineer. She was here to watch, learn, and protect. Her mission was clear. She was to remain undercover, blending into the student body as just another ordinary human. And to her dismay, that's exactly how the other students saw her. As she walked through the campus, she could hear the hushed whispers behind her, the barely suppressed laughter that echoed across the hallways. What is that? A human. How did they even get in here? The words stung, but she kept her head high. After all, she had dealt with worse. The galaxy didn't know what they were dealing with when it came to humans. Yet, she entered her first class, advanced quantum physics. It was an important subject that would be pivotal in understanding how the galaxy's most advanced technologies worked. But the class was full of students who were already far ahead of her. Aliens of all shapes, sizes, and capabilities surrounded her. There were species who communicated with only their minds, others whose bodies were entirely made of energy. Some had multiple limbs, others were enormous, towering over her by at least 3 meters. It was enough to make anyone feel insignificant, especially someone as ordinary as Hera. Professor Zarnak, a tall, dark-skinned alien with 4 long, sinuous tentacles, was the instructor for the class. He greeted the students with a quiet reverence, his eyes gleaming with intelligence as he began the lecture. When he introduced Hera to the class, his voice held a touch of admiration, which only made the whispers around her grow louder. She had scored the highest marks in the entrance exams, which meant she was considered academically gifted, but no one believed it. As Zarnak outlined the day's lecture, Hera fought the urge to shrink into her seat. It wasn't that she didn't understand the material. She did, but she had to make it look like she didn't. She had to appear as if she belonged in the back of the class, not as a leader in the making. Her fingers drummed quietly on the desk, her mind calculating everything around her, her next move, the potential allies she could find, and the subtle ways she could shift her position without drawing attention. Duros, the tall, translucent blue-skinned alien who had been the first to mock her when she entered the academy, was seated 2 rows ahead. His eyes followed her every movement, and she could sense the disdain radiating off of him. His group of friends snickered every time she made an awkward gesture, and they whispered to each other in their alien language. They were clearly hoping to catch her making a mistake. It was almost too easy to slip into their trap. The truth was, she could have easily shown off her advanced knowledge of quantum theory, but that would only put a target on her back. And she had no intention of revealing herself just yet. The class went on, and Hera tried to focus on the lecture. It wasn't hard to follow, but she pretended to struggle with some of the more complex concepts, jotting down notes in an exaggerated manner, making sure to leave gaps in her understanding. She noticed a few of the students who had been eyeing her earlier now looked away, disinterested. That was good. They had dismissed her, just as she had planned. After the lecture ended, the students dispersed to begin their practical exercises. The task was simple: create a stable quantum field to hold a small object in place. While the other students seemed to breeze through the task, Hera moved slowly, deliberately making mistakes, as if she were struggling with the concept. She could hear Duros and his friends making snide comments as they passed her station. "It's amazing how they let humans into this place," one of them muttered. "Look at how hard she's trying." What's the point? They can't even understand basic energy manipulation. Hera bit back the urge to snap at them. Instead, she took a deep breath, forcing herself to stay focused. She could hear the comments, but she wouldn't let them distract her. Her mission came first. She had to stay hidden, play the role of a clueless human student until the time came for her to act. As the exercise continued, she found herself growing more and more frustrated. It wasn't that she couldn't manipulate quantum fields. She had done it countless times before in battle situations. But here, in the controlled, sterile environment of the academy, her movements felt unnatural. The equipment was too small, the task too simple. But she held herself back, keeping her expressions neutral and her movements slow. Finally, Duros walked past her again, his gaze lingering for a moment before he spoke, as though trying to provoke her. "You know, I bet you wouldn't last 10 minutes in a real fight," he sneered. Hera's fingers twitched. For a moment, just a brief moment, she considered showing them what she was capable of. She could end the mockery, silence Duros and his friends once and for all. But she reminded herself of her mission. She couldn't reveal the depth of her abilities. Not yet. It would all come in time. For now, she was just another student, trying her best to fit in. When the exercise ended, Hera gathered her things and left the classroom, her mind whirling. She made her way to the academy's central courtyard, a massive open space with a holographic sky overhead. As she sat down at one of the benches, she took a deep breath, letting the quiet settle over her. She was playing a dangerous game, but she had no choice. The galaxy needed her to keep her true identity hidden until the right moment. And while it was difficult to endure the ridicule, she knew it would be worth it in the end. Over the next few days, Hera continued to play her role. She kept her head low, participated in the lessons, and ignored the whispers. But the tension was building, both within her and around her. Every day, she could feel the eyes of her alien classmates on her, scrutinizing her every move. And every day, she resisted the urge to reveal what she was truly capable of. It was a constant battle between the soldier she had been and the student she was pretending to be. But one thing was clear. Hera knew the time would come when she could no longer hide. Her true mission was waiting, and the galaxy was about to learn exactly why humans were feared in the universe. For now, though, Hera was content to remain just another face in the crowd. It wouldn't be long before everything changed. A hidden strength revealed. The days at the Galactic Academy were long and filled with challenges, but none were as unexpected as the ones Hera would face in the upcoming weeks. Each day, she continued to play the role of the ordinary student, trying to be as invisible as possible. Her classmates, led by Duros, continued to mock her, their whispers growing louder with each passing day. Yet, despite the ridicule, Hera's resolve remained firm. She had a mission to complete, and nothing, not even the arrogant alien students, would sway her from her path. As the second week of classes began, the Academy announced a new, more intense round of training. Hera's heart quickened as she read the bulletin. It would be a practical exam, combat simulations. Every student was required to participate in a combat simulation exercise designed to test their ability to think strategically under pressure. Hera knew that this would be her moment, her time to shine, or, more accurately, her time to reveal the first hints of her true skills. The night before the simulation, Hera sat alone in her dorm room, preparing. The holographic combat suits provided by the Academy were not much different from the ones she had used in the past, except for their lack of advanced features. She knew that in this simulation, her military-grade combat gear was far superior to anything the Academy could offer. But she couldn't risk using it. Not yet. She would have to rely on her instincts, her mind, and the training she had received long before arriving at the Academy. She double-checked the settings on her comms device, ensuring it was set to a secure channel. She didn't want anyone hearing the encrypted message she would send. She knew the Scarlet Armada was still tracking her movements, and while the Academy was far from being their target, She couldn't afford to take any risks. As she finished preparing, she glanced out the window. The stars twinkled in the distance, a reminder of everything that had brought her here, and everything she had to protect. The morning of the simulation arrived, and the atmosphere in the academy was electric with excitement. Students lined up outside the simulation chambers, eager to show off their skills. Some were confident, boasting to their friends about the easy victory they would secure. Others were nervous, unsure of how the simulation would unfold. Hera, however, felt calm. This was her element. A mock battle. An exercise in strategy and reflexes. It was exactly what she had trained for her entire life. When it was her turn to enter the simulation chamber, Hera took a deep breath and stepped forward. The door slid shut behind her, and the lights dimmed. The simulation began. Her objective was simple: neutralize the enemy forces using non-lethal tactics. But Hera knew better. This wasn't about completing the mission. It was about revealing just enough to show her potential, while still keeping her true identity under wraps. As the enemy forces appeared in the simulation, Hera's mind clicked into action. Her military training took over, allowing her to make decisions with a level of precision and efficiency that no ordinary student could match. She moved swiftly through the holographic terrain, her movements smooth and calculated. The enemy soldiers in the simulation were no match for her, and within minutes she had incapacitated most of them, using only the tactics she had learned during real battles. But she didn't stop there. She continued to push the boundaries of the simulation, carefully controlling the environment to her advantage. It wasn't long before Duros, who had been watching the simulation from the observation deck, began to take notice. Hera's movements were far too fluid, too deliberate. He frowned, squinting at the display. What is this? How is she doing that? He muttered to himself. He couldn't believe it. The human girl, who had struggled in every other class, was dominating the simulation, outperforming everyone else by a wide margin. When the simulation ended, Hera stood still, waiting for the evaluation. The room buzzed with the murmurs of the other students, their surprise evident. Duros, in particular, seemed to be on edge, his eyes fixed on Hera. How did she do that? He repeated, his voice tinged with disbelief. He couldn't comprehend what he had just witnessed. The human girl, who had seemed so unremarkable just days ago, had just demonstrated combat skills that surpassed even the most seasoned of students. Professor Zarnak entered the chamber, reviewing the results. Hera stood at attention, not giving any indication that she had noticed the shocked expressions on her classmates' faces. Zarnak glanced at the readouts, nodding approvingly. Impressive performance, Hera, he said, his voice calm but filled with recognition. You scored the highest in this simulation. Excellent work. As the class dispersed, Hera made her way to the cafeteria. Her mind raced with the implications of what had just happened. The time to reveal her true abilities was drawing nearer, but it wasn't yet the right moment. She couldn't afford to let her guard down. Not yet. Not while the threat of the Scarlet Armada still loomed in the distance. At lunch, as she sat alone in the massive dining hall, Hera noticed that a few of the students who had previously mocked her were now looking at her differently. Duros, in particular, seemed to be avoiding her gaze, though his eyes kept flicking in her direction. For the first time since she had arrived at the academy, Hera felt like she was no longer invisible. She had earned their attention, for better or for worse. But it was Jiho, the quiet, observant alien from her xenobiology class, who approached her once more. His eyes narrowed as he sat down across from her. You weren't just lucky in that simulation, he said quietly, his voice barely above a whisper. You know what you're doing. I've seen that kind of precision before. Hera met his gaze but said nothing. Instead, she gave a small, practiced smile. Luck is a funny thing, isn't it? It always seems to favor the prepared. Jiho's lips twitched in the slightest of smiles, but his expression remained thoughtful. I know what you really are, he said, his voice so quiet that only Hera could hear it. You're not just some human trying to fit in. You've been trained for something far greater than this." Hera's heart skipped a beat. For a moment, she thought about revealing the truth, about telling Jiho who she really was, the leader of the human resistance, a captain in the Special Operations Division, a hero who had saved countless lives. But she didn't. Not yet. Instead, she leaned forward slightly, lowering her voice. "You're right, but you're also wrong. Right now, I'm just a student, and that's all I need to be." Jiho studied her for a long moment before nodding, as if accepting her words. "I'm not going to ask any more questions, but don't forget, Hera, I'm watching. And if you ever need help, you know where to find me." Hera simply nodded, grateful for his understanding. There was something about Jiho that made him different from the others. He wasn't just another alien student. He was someone who could see through the facade, someone who might one day be an ally. As the days passed, Hera continued to prove herself in subtle ways, outsmarting her classmates in combat simulations and theoretical tests alike. Every time Duros tried to provoke her, she kept her cool, knowing that the time would come when she would need to show him, and everyone else, exactly what humanity was capable of. For now, she would play the part of the humble student. But deep down, Hera knew that the universe had yet to see what she could truly do. And when the time came, the Academy and the galaxy would know that humans weren't just survivors. They were warriors. The unseen hero. The days at the Galactic Academy stretched on, each one blending into the next. Yet for Hera, every day felt like an unrelenting challenge. The Academy's vast halls, the alien students, the never-ending streams of lessons, they were all part of the intricate web she had to navigate. And despite her success in the combat simulations, she still couldn't shake the feeling that she was treading on dangerous ground. Her true mission, the one that had brought her here, was far from over. But each day, her growing reputation among the students made it harder and harder to remain unnoticed. It was the morning of her third week at the Academy when Hera found herself once again at the heart of a new challenge. The Academy had scheduled an advanced fieldwork assignment, a test where students were required to work in pairs to solve complex environmental issues involving alien biomes. The task was designed to push their understanding of xenobiology and alien ecosystems, combining both theoretical knowledge and hands-on practice. And while Hera had no doubt she could handle the task, there was one catch. Students were paired randomly, and she had no idea who would be her partner. The announcement came during breakfast in the cafeteria, where a large screen flashed with the names of the new pairs. Hera took a deep breath as she scanned the list. Her heart sank when she saw her name next to Duros, the alien who had made it his mission to belittle her from the moment she stepped onto the Academy grounds. Duros, whose smooth blue skin shimmered under the cafeteria's artificial lighting, seemed almost delighted at the pairing. His friend snickered as he walked toward her table, his eyes gleaming with malice. "Looks like we're stuck together," he said, his voice laced with sarcasm. "I suppose you'll need all the help you can get, Earthling." Hera kept her gaze steady, unwilling to show any signs of discomfort. She had already endured worse, far worse, back in the war zones of Earth. "I think we'll manage just fine," she replied, her voice calm. "I'll see you in class, Duros." He didn't respond, but his smirk was enough. As he turned and walked away, Hera's mind began to race. Working with Duros would be a challenge, but she couldn't afford to back down. This assignment, like everything else, was part of her mission. She had to remain calm, focused, and most importantly, unpredictable. Duros and his friends had no idea who she really was, and she would make sure it stayed that way. Later that morning, the two of them were assigned to an alien jungle biome simulation. It was a dense, humid environment, full of dangerous flora and fauna that required the utmost attention to detail. The mission was simple: identify and neutralize a potential biological threat that could harm nearby colonies. Duros, of course, was eager to take charge. He had already made his thoughts clear on Hera's abilities, or lack thereof, and he was determined to prove himself superior. As they arrived at the simulation area, Hera immediately began analyzing the environment. The air was thick with humidity, and the ground was covered in strange, glowing plants. The landscape was alien, yet eerily familiar. Her mind, trained for years in the art of battlefield survival, immediately began assessing the risks. Which plants were poisonous, which creatures might be lurking in the shadows, and where the potential dangers lay. She knew how to work in hostile environments. This was nothing compared to the war zones she had survived back on Earth. Duros, however, didn't seem to share her urgency. He was too busy showing off his knowledge, spouting off technical jargon that he had probably memorized for the assignment. "These plants are harmless," he said, gesturing toward the glowing vines. "But I've read that the local fauna are highly aggressive, especially the larger predators." Hera barely looked at him as she continued to scan their surroundings, her military-grade sensors picking up minute details that Duros had completely missed. The predators Duros spoke of were nothing compared to the foes she had fought in the past. She didn't need to waste time explaining herself to him. So instead, she focused on the task at hand. As they moved deeper into the jungle, Hera spotted the first signs of danger. A set of glowing footprints, the mark of a predator on the prowl. Her instincts kicked in immediately. "We need to change direction," she said quietly, her voice calm but authoritative. "There's a predator in the area." Duros scoffed. "Please, we're fine. Stop overreacting." But Hera didn't wait for his response. She moved swiftly and silently, her years of experience guiding her every step. She knew that in a jungle like this, hesitation could cost them everything. She took the lead, guiding them through the dense foliage, her eyes constantly scanning for any signs of movement. Duros hesitated for a moment, then followed her begrudgingly. It wasn't long before they encountered the predator. It was a massive creature, roughly the size of a large earth tiger, but with translucent scales that shimmered in the light. Its eyes glowed with an unnatural hunger, and its fangs were sharp enough to tear through armor. Hera instinctively reached for her weapon, but then paused. She couldn't use lethal force in this simulation. This wasn't a real battle. It was a test. But she couldn't afford to let Duros get hurt either. The predator lunged at them, and in a split second, Hera made her move. She dodged to the side, pulling Duros out of the way with one swift motion. The creature's claws swiped through the air, missing them by inches. Without hesitation, Hera activated a sonic disruptor device that she had modified for the assignment. The creature recoiled as the high-pitched frequency emitted by the device caused it to retreat in pain. Duros stared at her, his eyes wide with shock. You knew how to handle that thing," he stammered. Hera didn't respond immediately. She was already moving, tracking the predator's retreating form. She could feel the tension in Duros's posture, but she didn't have time to explain herself. The mission wasn't over. They continued through the jungle, with Hera leading the way. Her quick thinking had saved them. And Duros now followed her more cautiously, realizing that she was more than just an average student. They soon came upon the biological threat, a rapidly spreading fungus that had begun infecting the local plants. The fungus produced spores that, if inhaled, could cause severe neurological damage to any species within range. Hera analyzed the situation quickly. "We need to isolate the infected area," she said, her voice steady. "And we need to contain the spores before they spread to the colony. Start sealing off the perimeter while I handle the spores." Duros looked at her, unsure of how to proceed, but this time, he didn't argue. Instead, he followed her orders, working alongside her to complete the task. Hera worked quickly, using her training to apply the proper containment protocols, making sure to neutralize the spores before they could spread further. When the mission was finally completed, Duros looked at Hera with a mixture of awe and begrudging respect. "I didn't think you had it in you," he admitted. "You actually know what you're doing." Hera gave him a small, knowing smile. "I told you we'd manage," she said, her voice calm. "Now let's get back to the academy." As they returned to the simulation center, the rest of the students were gathered around, eagerly awaiting their results. When Professor Zarnak called them up to report their findings, Hera stood tall beside Duros. "The biological threat has been neutralized," she reported. "The area has been contained. The predators have been driven away." Duros didn't say much, but he didn't need to. His earlier smugness had melted away, replaced with a newfound respect for the human student who had just proven herself to be more capable than any of them had imagined. As Hera made her way back to her dorm room later that day, she couldn't help but feel a sense of accomplishment. The mission was complete, but more importantly, she had shown Duros, and perhaps the entire Academy, that humans were capable of far more than anyone could have imagined. She was still playing the role of the student, but the truth was clear. The time for hiding was slowly coming to an end. In the coming days, the whispers about Hera would grow louder, but they wouldn't be about her failure. They would be about her strength, and she was ready for that. The rising tension. The weeks at the Galactic Academy stretched on, but as Hera's reputation continued to grow, so did the pressure. She had successfully completed each challenge thrown her way, earning the respect of her peers and even managing to diffuse the tension in her partnership with Duros. But deep down, she knew that the Academy wasn't just an academic institution. It was a battleground in its own right, full of intrigue, hidden alliances, and dangerous secrets, and Hera was at the center of it all. One evening, after a long day of advanced xenobiology lectures and physical training, Hera sat alone in her room, reviewing her mission parameters once again. Her objective had remained unchanged since she'd first arrived at the Academy. Observe, gather intelligence, and protect the Academy's most valuable asset, the quantum research facility. It was a delicate balance, one that required her to remain under the radar, while also preparing for the day when the Scarlet Armada would make their move. As she sat by her desk, reviewing the encrypted messages from her commanders, her wristband vibrated. It was a simple text from Jiho. "Meet me in the observation tower. We need to talk." Hera felt a knot form in her stomach. Jiho had always been perceptive, and his quiet demeanor made him one of the few students who had seen through her facade. He knew there was more to her than just a struggling human student. What he didn't know, however, was just how much more. Still, she couldn't afford to ignore him. If Jiho was reaching out to her, it meant something important was on the horizon. She grabbed her jacket and left her dorm, making her way through the darkened hallways of the Academy. The observation tower was at the far end of the campus, offering a panoramic view of Centurion Prime's glittering surface and the stars beyond. It was a perfect place for quiet contemplation or secret conversations. When Hera arrived at the top of the tower, she found Jiho waiting by the large glass windows. He was staring out at the distant horizon, his expression unreadable. The soft hum of the Academy's engines was the only sound breaking the silence. "I wasn't sure you would come," Jiho said as he turned to face her. His cat-like eyes gleamed in the dim light. "But I need to tell you something. Something important." Hera stepped forward, her gaze steady. "What is it?" "I've been investigating," Jiho began, his voice low, cautious. "I've noticed things, patterns, not just with you, but with the Academy. There are whispers, rumors, and I'm starting to think there's more going on here than we've been told." Hera's pulse quickened. "What do you mean?" Jiho took a deep breath before continuing. "The Scarlet Armada. They're coming, aren't they? I don't know when, but they are. I've seen the signs, little things. It's not just the research facility they're after. They're after something else. Something much more dangerous, something that could change everything." Hera was silent for a moment, processing his words. Could Jiho have pieced it together? She had been so careful to keep her true mission hidden, but perhaps she had underestimated him. Still, she couldn't reveal the full truth to him, not yet. "I'm not sure what you're talking about," Hera said, her voice carefully neutral. "But if you're talking about the quantum research facility, then yes, it's a critical asset. And yes, the Scarlet Armada has their sights set on it. Jiho's eyes narrowed, but he didn't push. Instead, he stepped closer, his voice dropping to a whisper. I don't trust Duros. There's something about him that doesn't sit right with me, and I don't think you should trust him either. Hera raised an eyebrow. Duros. Jiho nodded. He's been acting strange lately. It's like he's hiding something. I don't know what it is, but I don't think he's just another student. Not anymore. I'm starting to think he's more involved in this whole thing than we realize. Hera's mind raced. Duros had always been a thorn in her side, but the idea that he might be involved in something more sinister was troubling. Could he have ties to the Scarlet Armada? Or was this just another case of intergalactic paranoia? Hera didn't know, but she couldn't afford to ignore the possibility. I'll keep an eye on him, Hera said, her voice steady. But for now, you need to be careful. There are forces at work here that none of us can control, and I need to stay focused on my mission. Do you understand? Jiho hesitated before nodding. I get it, but just remember, if you need help, you don't have to do this alone. For the first time, Hera saw a flicker of something in Jiho's eyes, something that wasn't just curiosity or suspicion. It was trust, and though she couldn't afford to get too close to anyone, she knew that Jiho was a valuable ally to have in the coming days. I'll keep that in mind, Hera said, her voice quiet but sincere. But for now, we both need to be careful. Keep your head down, Jiho. We don't know who we can trust. With that, she turned and made her way back down the tower, her thoughts spinning. The Scarlet Armada was coming, and it was only a matter of time before everything would come to a head. But what was Duros' involvement in all of this? And how far was the Academy willing to go to protect its secrets? As she returned to her room, Hera locked the door behind her, sitting down at her desk to continue her mission. She couldn't afford to trust anyone completely, not yet. The war was far from over, and she had a role to play. But the pieces were starting to fall into place, and Hera knew that soon the game would change. The Academy and its many secrets would soon be under siege, and Hera, the unassuming human student, would have to fight harder than ever to protect everything she had sworn to defend. The secrets beneath the surface. The days following her conversation with Jiho were some of the longest and most tense Hera had faced at the Academy. Her mission, once a simple observation task, had grown increasingly complicated. Not only did she have to keep her true identity hidden, but now she had to navigate the shifting alliances and growing tensions between the students and faculty. The threat of the Scarlet Armada hung over everything, and she could feel the storm brewing. Every day felt like a countdown, and every move she made, every word she said, felt like it could be her last opportunity to maintain the fragile web of deception she had so carefully woven. The most unsettling part was the growing suspicion surrounding Duros. Hera had always known there was something off about him, but Jiho's warning had given her reason to pause. Duros, once an arrogant alien with a clear disdain for humans, had been acting strangely, more withdrawn, more secretive. But was it simply his arrogance manifesting in a different form, or was there something darker at play? Hera didn't have the answers, but she knew she couldn't afford to ignore him any longer. The Academy's schedule grew even more demanding as the weeks passed. More practical assignments, more lectures, and more drills. But it was the sudden surge in combat simulations that caught Hera's attention. Students were being asked to perform complex, high-stakes maneuvers that simulated everything from alien ambushes to galaxy-wide invasions. Each test seemed more dangerous than the last, and the stakes were higher than ever. Hera had expected this. The Academy was preparing for something. But what? One morning, the loudspeaker overhead blared with an announcement. All students, report to the main training hall for a surprise combat exercise. This is a full-scale simulation. No one is to leave until the exercise is complete. All students must participate. Hera's heart skipped a beat. A surprise exercise meant that it was going to be intense, and given the increased frequency of these simulations, it was clear that the Academy was preparing for something far bigger than anyone knew. This could be her opportunity to learn more, to find the weaknesses in their defenses, and maybe, just maybe, to uncover the truth behind the Academy's mysterious plans. The training hall was massive, a high-tech facility capable of simulating entire battlefields in real time. As Hera entered, she could see the other students already gathering, looking anxious but excited. Duros was among them, his face set in a hard expression. He didn't look at her when she walked past, and that gave Hera a strange feeling. Was he already preparing for something? Did he know something she didn't? Professor Zarnak stood at the front of the room, his 4 tentacles twitching in anticipation. "Welcome, students," he began. "Today's exercise will be a full-scale battle scenario. You will be divided into teams, and you will face off against one another as if you were defending an entire colony from a hostile force. This will test your strategic thinking, your leadership skills, and your ability to function under extreme pressure." The students buzzed with nervous energy as Zarnak's tentacles pointed toward the walls of the training hall. Large, holographic projectors flickered to life, casting images of a distant colony under siege, with enemy ships hovering ominously above it. Duros' eyes lit up as the simulation began. Hera knew that he was one of the strongest competitors in this exercise. His alien physiology and natural agility would give him a massive advantage in combat situations, but Hera wasn't worried. She knew that strategy and leadership mattered just as much, if not more. This wasn't just about brute strength. It was about knowing when to act, when to retreat, and when to lead. As the simulation started, Hera was placed in a squad with Jiho and a few other students she hadn't worked with before. Immediately, the holographic environment changed, and they found themselves in a mock-up of a colony's defense perimeter, surrounded by towering buildings and defensive shields. Her mind clicked into gear as the enemy forces began to advance. The first wave of invaders appeared, large, heavily armed soldiers with advanced energy shields and weapons. Hera's tactical mind instantly went to work, analyzing their formations and movements. She issued orders to her squad, directing them to fall back behind the defensive structures, creating choke points where the enemy's numbers would be useless. "You two, get to the control tower and secure the defenses," Hera commanded. "The rest of you, set up energy barriers around our perimeter. We need to buy time until reinforcements arrive." Jiho, as always, was quick to respond. His movements were swift and precise, his tactical mind complementing hers perfectly. The two of them made an excellent team, covering each other's blind spots, anticipating moves before they happened. They were starting to form a bond, one built on trust, mutual respect, and the knowledge that survival depended on their cooperation. Duros, however, wasn't so cooperative. He moved quickly, but not in the coordinated way that Hera expected from a leader. His squad scattered, leaving gaps in their defenses, and soon the enemy began to break through. Hera's eyes narrowed as she saw what was happening. Duros wasn't fighting to win the simulation. He was fighting to prove something, to show off his abilities without considering the bigger picture. And in doing so, he was endangering the entire operation. "We need to regroup and fortify the center," Hera called out, her voice sharp. "Jiho, take 2 students with you and help Duros' team. They're exposed, and we can't afford to lose our position." Jiho nodded, running off to execute her orders. Hera didn't waste time. She directed the rest of her squad to hold their ground while she moved toward Duros' group. She could see the chaos unfolding. Students were firing their weapons, but they were scattered and uncoordinated. The enemy had started to gain ground, and the simulation's countdown timer was ticking down quickly. "Duros," Hera called out, her voice stern. "What are you doing? Get your team in position, or we'll all lose this exercise." He turned toward her, his face a mixture of frustration and arrogance. "I don't need your help, human. I know what I'm doing." Hera's patience thinned. "You're out of your depth, Duros," she said, her voice carrying authority. "We're a team. You're not leading this by yourself. Either you follow orders, or you lose this fight." There was a long, tense silence as Duros stared at her, his eyes flashing with anger. But then something shifted. Perhaps it was the realization that she was right. Perhaps it was the mounting pressure of the simulation. Either way, Duros finally nodded, albeit begrudgingly. "Fine," he muttered, "but this is your last chance to prove you're not just some earthling who got lucky." Hera didn't answer him. She simply took charge, rallying the team and reuniting them into a single, cohesive force. With Duros' squad finally in position, Hera's team took the offensive. The tide of the battle began to turn. Duros' earlier recklessness had given the enemy an advantage, but now, under Hera's leadership, the enemy's forces were starting to falter. The battle raged on, and as the simulation neared its conclusion, it was clear that her squad had gained the upper hand. As the final countdown began, the simulation abruptly ended. The entire training hall went quiet as the results flashed on the screen. Hera's team had won, but the victory felt bittersweet. She had proven herself once again, but she had also exposed Duros' weakness as a leader. Professor Zarnek's voice broke the silence. "Outstanding performance, Hera. Your tactical decisions were flawless. You adapted quickly under pressure and led your team to victory. Duros, however, your team's disorganization cost us the simulation." Duros' face reddened in anger, but he said nothing. Hera didn't look at him. She had no need to. The truth had been made clear. He was a student who still had much to learn, and she was the one teaching him. As the students left the training hall, Hera remained behind for a moment, taking in the implications of the exercise. The simulation had been a test of more than just combat skills. It had been a test of leadership, strategy, and trust. And as she walked back to her dorm, she couldn't shake the feeling that this was only the beginning. The Scarlet Armada was coming closer, and soon the Academy would have to face the consequences of its secrets. Hera knew one thing for certain. She was ready. The real battle was about to begin.